I am Anna Maria McCormack. I am the Director of Marketing. Before we begin, I just want to cover off on a few things. We are going to this webinar is recorded. It will be sent out to everyone in about 3 days after we get done here. And so just if you can also share it once it's recorded. We ask everyone to use the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen for questions. So if you have any throughout the webinar, you can put them in there. We are dedicating part of this specifically for Q&A. And then I want to introduce a few of my coworkers here. We've got Tony. He is trap support. So if you have called in and you have a trap problem, he's probably the gentleman you've talked to. We also have John Kinsey, who also mans the phones from time to time, but he's out. You may have seen him at some events and some speaking. He is our director of sales. And then Margaret is customer support. So if you're calling in, again, with questions regarding orders or traps, she can help you. And then Shannon, who is also in customer support. Many of you may have talked to her as well. And then Aaron, who will be conducting the webinar, is our Director of Outreach, Education, and Research. And I'm going to hand it off to him.
All right, folks. Like you said, my name is Aaron Sumrall, and I appreciate you for spending a little time with us this afternoon. And we're going to go through some things that we know we got a lot of new owners in the Pig Brig family, and that's some of the things that we try to touch on from time to time is just your basic techniques, your functions, and your fundamentals and things like that. So we're going to cover a little bit about that in the first few slides, and then we're going to really get kind of deep into some areas that for some of y'all that are a little longer in the tooth per se, catching pigs and trying to hone those skills and things like that. We hope that we're going to be able to address some of the things that you may be facing that's out there. But one of those things that you want to do, as Anna Maria said, is as we're going through this presentation, if you got questions that come up, put them in that Q&A feature there, and we're going to be watching that as we're going through the presentation and logging those questions. And then whenever we get to the end of it, then we're going to open that up and start addressing those questions that you may have. And we're going to be here as long as it takes to answer your questions. So should something come up after we get off this presentation tonight that you think, well, man, I should have asked that question, give us a call, because the individuals that Margaret introduced, or that Anna Maria introduced there, that's who you're going to be talking to. So you're going to be talking to the folks with Pig Brig. We know what we're talking about tonight, and definitely can fill those questions should you have them after the event's over. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to kick this thing off. And the first things first about any kind of thing to do with trapping, you got to know where to put the traps. You got to think about site selection and things like that. So one of the just rules of thumbs that I have as far as places that you really want to try to shy from for a couple of different reasons is one is I never try to put traps right in the middle, absolutely in their bed. I try not to put traps in the middle of where they're literally actively feeding. So if you see where pigs are actively feeding in a hayfield or somewhere like that, and you put a trap right in the middle of that, that's probably not the best choice. And the analogy that I use whenever talking to people about this is that you think about your own house. You got your bedroom, you got your kitchen. You probably know how if something's changed, something's new, or something other that's not supposed to be there in your kitchen, because you spend a lot of time there, see a lot of things. Same thing with the bedroom. Spend some time there. If something is not supposed to be there, it draws some attention. But how many times do you walk up and down the hallway and you don't realize that maybe a picture has collected a little dust, or the pictures may have changed, or something has happened? And same thing kind of holds true with most all wildlife, as you got bed to feed corridors and things like that. Typically where there's a lot of that transportation, that movement through those areas, is where those traps probably need to be. The reason for not putting it right in the middle of the kitchen is because if they're actively feeding on a spot there, they know what they're coming for. They know what they're looking for. So what you need to do is think about trying to intercept those pigs before they get to what they're looking for. And they'll sometimes hang up a little bit, and you got the better chances of getting them on bait. One of the things too that's very common is that whenever pigs start getting pressured, they start moving after dark. Well, that's something that's 101. It's like, yeah, that no doubt. But what they'll do, they may get on their feet sometime before dark and start moving to those feeding areas. That area that they're occupying in that pre-dark period before they get out there in that exposed area, that's where we're talking about putting those traps out, is in those transitional zones from that bed to the feeding. Putting traps in the middle of the bed is going to quite often blow those pigs out. So the other things to think about with winter to spring, in the wintertime, there's pigs cover some pretty vast expanses just trying to find enough food to stay alive and to go through their normal functions. Whereas in the spring, when we start seeing buds break, things like that start happening, the ground starts warming up. Typically, you got a little bit more rainfall in that ground, saturating that ground, and that warm ground that's saturated pushes a lot of those invertebrates closer to the soil, to the surface of the soil, where over the course of the winter they didn't have access to that food source. So there's going to be a lot of changing things in the seasons in just the next few weeks. Depending on how far south you are, they may have already started to change. So when we think about that movement pattern, large areas that they cover in the wintertime just to find enough to stay alive, in the spring of the year, sometimes people will tell us that we're just not seeing the pigs anymore like what we were. Did they just disappear? No, not likely they didn't. What had happened is that if there is an increasing amount of food that's available on that given landscape, they just don't have to move as much. So they may stay in an area and exploit that food resource a little bit more before they have to move to find something to fill that belly again. So in that situation, the best thing to do is just kind of remain vigilant. Put you a few cameras scattered out around there. One of the things that I typically commonly use in the spring of the year is one thing in the spring of the year is you're going to probably have, especially in the South, is you got a lot of bugs. That's when the ticks start moving around. That's when your mosquitoes really start fattening up and things like that. So those pigs are going to look for a place to kind of get rid of those external parasites. We see those on light poles and corner posts on your fence and things like that where they've been rubbing. So what I do, and instead of going out and beating the brush and looking for these pigs and taking the risk of blowing them out of their habitat, is on a corner post or on a tree or something of that nature, is staple a rug to that tree and cover that rug with either burnt motor oil or burnt fish grease or fry grease or something like that. Those pigs will find that oil rub to use it as an external parasite relief, and that lets you know it's a definite giveaway tip off that you got pigs in the area. We just now need to kind of hone in just a little bit. Other things to think about as far as examining the landscape is the pinch points. There's going to be some natural pinch points out there. There's going to be some introduced pinch points out there. What we mean is that if you take that hourglass look, you got the bulbs on either end and the skinny part in the middle. Well, that skinny part in the middle is what we're calling a pinch point. And typically what we see in the landscape is that you may have two heavily wooded areas that are really thick that can hold a lot of animals. But then somewhere between those two heavily wooded areas, you're going to have a narrowing point. And a lot of times that's where a creek may flow through, riparian areas and so forth. And what that does is it funnels those animals down into a really precise travel corridor, and is an excellent place to put a trap, because now you've got those animals that are navigating through an area that reduces down the available area that they can freely travel or safely travel and so forth. In the spring of the year, we typically don't have to worry a lot about water, but water is the number one thing that drives that pig as far as what's required for a landscape to hold pigs. They've got to have water. They can't stay there. The other thing about the bedding is in the spring of the year, fall of the year, wintertime, we got a lot of acorns on the ground, pecans, anything like that. They can get fat quick. And all of us know that it doesn't take long for a pig on good nutrition that they start producing those piglets pretty quickly. Well, in the spring of the year, whenever it's time for those pigs to start hitting the ground, those sows start looking for some extremely dense vegetation, dense cover to start having those pigs. When they start having those pigs, they get hungry quick too. Those sows get hungry quick. So what they're looking for is a lot of heavy cover that they can have those pigs, that they can keep those pigs hidden, but they're also close to a food source. So they don't have to get up and move much to find the nutrition that they need before they can get back to their bed and keep the coyotes and the bobcats off those little bacon bits that's running around their feet. So think about a few of these things. We'll elaborate a little bit more on them as we go in there. One of the things that's big about that coming into the spring too, before we jump off of this slide, is that in the wintertime, we don't have leaves on a lot of these trees in the south. So as those trees start to bud out in the spring of the year, whenever you get to a trap site, even if it's a trap site you've used for years and years and years, look up for just a few seconds and make sure that those limbs have budded back out, that you don't have any dead limbs that's above that trap that could fall out on you or damage the trap or anything like that. So check out for those widow makers before you go into employing a trap site for the spring of the year. Livestock on the property. What we're thinking about with this is that we want to make sure that we understand if you're trapping a friend's property or you're trapping somebody's property that you may be contracted out to do so, is in the spring of the year, a lot of times we have livestock producers that are moving livestock from a winter pasture to a spring and summer pasture. So if they're moving those livestock in, we need to kind of get an idea of what they're doing, when they're doing it, and then the classification of those livestock. And what I mean by the classification of those livestock is if you've got fall born calves, for example, they're going to be weaning in the spring of the year. And those yearling cattle, stalker cattle, will be put on a pasture by themselves. Those stalker cattle are a lot like teenagers. They find something to get into and they don't really ask for permission to do it. So if you're going to have no choice but to trap around yearling cattle, you probably are going to have to use a single strand electric fence around the trap site, around your trap, to keep those younger livestock out, just because of the curiosity of that animal. Quick way to do that is just making a single strand between 36 and 42 inches above ground. You get lower than 36 inches, then you can get into where those bigger pigs can get that electricity, and it's not going to do well whenever a pig's nose starts growing a blue flame out the end of it that's attached to that electric fence. The same thing holds true on the other end of it. If you get above 42 inches, some of those yearling cattle can go under that fence and it just negates the whole purpose. But we do have guides, instructional things that's out there that we can definitely set you up, that gives you the details, gives you the breakdown and everything else of exactly what we recommend and what we've researched and see the benefits of on an electric fence system that takes about 15 minutes to put up, and you can get the materials at any farm supply store that's close to where you're at. Moving on to the next thing on site selection that we're going to need to know about is, what is the history of the trapping on the land? So think about, if you've trapped that land in the past, where has it been productive? Where has it not been productive? Where has anything changed on the landscape from one year to the next? Are there new crops that's there that haven't been there before? So think about what that situation is. What kind of traps did they use in the past? How hard did they trap it? So you may come into an area that's new to you, that you haven't trapped before, but by asking a few questions and knowing, did those previous trappers or landowners push those pigs hard, then you may need to be mentally preparing yourself for pigs that could be trap shy. And all pigs have a weakness. It's just that we have to figure out what that weakness is. And those trap shy pigs, the one thing that we're going to have to do is stay patient. And we'll go into some more of that in detail here in just a couple of minutes. But the other things we already talked about again too, so we're not going to harp on it too much, is the bedding areas. That's super critical, knowing what's there. Now, one thing that does come to mind about the previous bullet that we didn't talk about is, in the spring of the year, we definitely see an uptick in dog hunting. The reason for that is it's not far off before we get into those hot months of the summer in the South, where a lot of those folks have to keep those dogs at the house and not run them in the heat and take chances on hurting your dogs. So they want to get that last chance to run those pigs in the spring of the year. And dogs and trapping don't typically go hand in hand very well, and expecting successes. So if they're going to be dogging in an area, probably not best to put those traps in that area. If they are going to be dogging in there, try to work with them where you can get the trapping taken care of first, and then come in following the trapping and let the dogs clean up whatever else is left in the area. And those dogs can be far more effective at cleaning up a few straggler pigs than trying to get ahead of 50 or 60 animals that may be in 3 or 4 different sounders on that landscape. Moving to that last bullet point, will anyone else be on the property in that spring of the year? It starts greening up. It's not cold, not dreary, not nasty anymore out there. People like to get out, soak up a little vitamin D, and enjoy the wildflowers, walk with the grandkids, and so forth. If you're going to have people on the property that's enjoying the property, make sure that you think about that whenever you put your trap sites up, that those trap sites might be tucked away from expected high human traffic areas, human movement areas. It could be the grandkids out there too, running around on the four-wheelers or the side-by-sides that may get down a little bit into these trails on these properties. So we just need to tuck those traps a little bit further away, for a couple of different reasons. One is that again, that increased activity from people is going to increase the likelihood of you're gonna educate those pigs. All that human activity, what that means to a pig is that's pressure. So it doesn't matter that if they're getting shot at or anything like that. If there is just a heck of a lot of human activity there, those pigs are going to start to increase their awareness of where they're at, maybe shy away from that a little bit more. The second reason there is too, is if you don't know everybody that's going to be at on that property at any given time, the safety factor for the human side of it is a big deal. We don't want people walking up, sticking their fingers through a pig brig to pet the cute little pig that's inside there. So that's some of the things that you may want to keep in mind. Adjoining property owners, kind of get an idea what they may be doing in the spring of the year. They may be out there shooting shotguns, or they may be out there just whatever doing loud activities. And again, too, those pigs don't know that that's not intended for them, and they could shy away. So a landowner that's adjacent to you, that's engaging in some fun springtime activity, you may just have to set those traps further away from that property line, giving those pigs a bit of a bigger buffer zone than what they would than what you would otherwise give maybe in the wintertime when there's not nearly as much human activity. So now we're going to move into the I guess some of the more in-depth parts of this is that we definitely are going to answer your questions when we get to the end of this program, or the end of this presentation, and definitely don't forget to log those in as we're going through. But one of the things that we definitely like to see is people contacting us before the event with something that they want to make sure that we cover, or that we try to put it in the queue to cover it later. Well, we got that tonight. So in this slide, we're going to go through, and I'm not going to stop and just go through the whole thing at one time, but each of these different bullet points here is going to go into the request of that answer that we got emailed in. So setting the trap for conditioning. Whenever we think about setting the trap for conditioning, I'm going to tell you this. I mean, there's some things that you can get away with pigs, and some things that you can't get away with. If you're going to sit with and visit with me, or we get the opportunity from time to time to interview some pretty impeccable people for positions with Pig Brig and so forth, and one of the first questions that'll be posed for me is in your opinion, what is the most critical phase or step in the trapping effort? And unequivocally, in my mind, and there is no close second to it, the most important thing for me in a trapping sequence is conditioning. If you're a good trapper that conditions in the appropriate manner, the techniques are correct, man, we can see some catches get really big just by some proper conditioning. Now whenever we start looking at that conditioning period, we get that question everywhere we go is, well, how long is it going to take? Well, if a pig wore a watch, I would be able to tell you. But whenever we start thinking about the length of conditioning, it's going to be dictated by the pig. So once we get that Pig Brig trap set up, whenever I go into an area and I set that trap up, I go from start to finish in the same visit. I drive the post, I hang the net, I put everything in place, get all the noise out of the way, and then I lift my nets up. Well, whenever I lift my nets up before I leave on that same visit, that same installation, I'm going to go ahead and condition that trap for the first time. Now, whenever I condition that trap for the first time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use about 90% of the bait on the outside of the trap, with only about 10% or so on the inside of the trap. What I want to make sure I do is that, yeah, there's like what we talked before, is that you got your pig household, you got the bedroom, the kitchen, and then you got the hallway in the middle. Well, if you go in there and you put a big piece of equipment, being a trap, into an environment that they are very well aware of what's going on, then you try to force them to go into a trap, they may shy a little bit. So what we do by conditioning that first time, the majority on the outside of the trap, we're introducing those pigs to the trap. We're telling them basically, we know you see the trap, we know that you're aware of what's going on, but we're not trying to force you. So whenever we bait with a lot of the bait on the outside, a little bit on the inside, then at that point we watch the pigs and they dictate the rest of the process. If as soon as they eat the bait on the inside of the trap, then there's no more bait getting put on the outside of the trap. It all goes to the inside. So that's going to dictate how long those pigs do that. I mean, some places I've been where we'll put a trap up, get it in conditioning mode, 90% on the outside, 10% on the inside, and on literally the very next night, we're putting all the bait on the inside because they had no hesitation. They went straight on into the trap. Other places that I've been where we talked about that if you've got trap shy pigs in an area and you got to practice your patience there, it may take you 10 days to 2 weeks to get those pigs to go into that trap the first time, and that's okay. We just don't want to force them to go into that trap before they're good and ready to go in. And so whenever we condition the trap, part of the question was that come in today is what do we use to keep that net up off the ground? And I just use the cam straps. I mean, everybody's got different things that they use, which is fine. Some people use the mid post straps. Some people use the cam straps. I've seen people even use hay string and keep the anchors down, keep the mid post straps down, use hay string. It doesn't really matter. You just basically in that situation, pick your preference and just stay with your preference. What I do though, whenever I hang my nets, is I go back to the questions that I asked the landowner before I even started putting the trap up. Is what are the pigs telling you? What do you see in those pig movements? And if that landowner tells me, man, I'm seeing these pigs during the daytime, I'm seeing them in the middle of the hay fields, I'm seeing them here and there, what that quickly tells me is that those pigs are not shy. They're not they're not operating under an increased awareness level. They're ready to be caught. And if that's the response I get, or what I may be seeing on my game cameras is that they're moving in the daytime, is that I'll only pick that net up in 2 locations. Wherever you pick that net up at it is on the exact opposite side of the trap. That's where you pick the second location up. So those 2 locations, you're going to have 2 locations in that situation that are 18 inches above the ground. And then those other 2 sides of the trap that are not picked up will be maybe 4 to 5 inches, 6 inches off the ground. So you'll have 2 high spots, 2 low spots that are in that conditioning trap. And what I do whenever I condition those pigs and picking that net up is I'll take the cam strap and I'll run it under the net through the skirt, and then I'll hook it back into the eye of the cam strap that's next to me. So run it under, run it back through, hook it in the eye, and it holds that trap up. Yeah, if you got some looser ground, you may see that post that doesn't have that cam strap attached to the ground anymore. It may start to lean in on you a bit. If you got 18 inches of post in the ground, it's not going to be a big deal. Whenever you put that cam strap back down on that anchor and tighten it back down, you're going to be good and tight. If you take those mid post straps off to use those mid post straps, just make sure that whenever you put those mid post straps back on, put them back at the right location. As far as that's why they're called a mid post strap, but make sure that they're not going around both nets, not going around the base net and the bore shield. If you go around the bore shield, then those pigs can get leverage on that bore shield because they got something to pull against. So make sure you're just going around that base net. So anyway, if the landowner tells me that they're not ever seeing pigs, but in the middle of the night on game camera, then they're shy, their heads are always up, things like that, that's something that's a dead giveaway that you're probably going to be working with some trap shy pigs. If I'm trapping around trap shy pigs, then I use 4 straps and pick the full net up off the ground 18 inches or so. And then what I do at that point again is I start at the outside bait on the outside, work it to the inside as the pigs let me know what to do and dictate that process. The next step in the thing moving on down into the bait situation is what do you bait with? What I'm going to tell you that you bait with is something that you can get consistently. The big thing with pigs is that they are smart and they look for a reason to run away. They look for a reason to quit cooperating with you. And many times they'll quit cooperating because you change the bait up on them. So whatever we're trapping, whatever bait you start the process with is what bait you need to end the process with. So I give everybody the analogy is just like both of my grandmas before they passed, they were unbelievable cooks, but both of them could make the same meal and I could tell you who cooked it based off of what it tasted like. So if you're using a recipe out there to catch those pigs, you better stick with the same recipe and you better be able to replicate it every time the same way, or you could push those pigs back. So for me, sometimes I mean I'm just not one of those recipe kind of guys. I want to keep it simple. So nothing on the globe that we've seen out there anywhere on the planet statistically is better than just regular dry shell corn. Everywhere you go, that's gonna get some results. Some places a little bit better than others, but that's gonna be something that's definitely your quick and go to. Though, like I said, those recipes you got to be able to replicate them. Make sure that you can do that. The other things to think about though is with baits is that there definitely are regional preferences. And what I mean by regional preferences is that corn may work great in Georgia where they're growing peanuts, but if those peanuts are getting close to pegging out, they're getting close to being ready, you're not going to catch a pig using corn because they're on the peanuts. That's what they would prefer. It's a higher protein, higher nutritional source. So in that situation where there are regional preferences, and peanuts is a definite example of that, is instead of going down and trying to find peanuts that you can have as a sustainable resource to use for trapping, I go to the grocery store and I go buy peanut oil and I'll soak the corn down with peanut oil. Now I get the peanut smell, but now I have a carrier that I'm using, which is just your dry corn. So there's definitely things that you can do to try to change the game in your favor. But look at the landscape around you. What are the pigs eating? If there's not much out there to eat to begin with, you don't need anything more than corn. If it's starting to get a little bit competitive out there for other sources of food, you may have to tweak it a little bit. Now, that's where it stops. Because if you go in there and you feel like you have to start throwing the kitchen sink at these pigs to be able to get them back on feed, it's probably a good thing that you need to back away from them. Because if you keep trying to force those pigs to come to where they're at because of bait resources or what you're trying to feed them in competition with available food resources, you're gonna lose the fight and you're gonna educate your pigs. So if they just refuse to come to bait, it's probably something out there on that landscape. We got to find out what it is, and then don't push those pigs. You may have to back away with it. The other thing that we talked about is where we talked about starting on the outside of the trap, then moving it to the inside as soon as those pigs start eating on the inside. The only thing about it, whenever I think about moving it to the inside of the trap, is that, yeah, obviously you want those pigs in the center of the trap when you drop that net to catch. But what I'm going to look at too is that, do I have a lot of vegetation on the ground where the skirt's going to hit the ground at? If there's a lot of grass there where the skirt's going to hit the ground at, I am not pulling out the weed whacker or the weed eater to go cut the grass down to make sure the skirt hits the ground good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to condition those pigs and pour that bait out where I know the skirt's going to hit the ground when I lower it. Those pigs are going to get rid of that grass for you in a hurry, and you don't have to have a lot more labor invested in doing so, and just gradually again as they're feeding, move them closer to the center to get ready to drop that net. What we recommend as far as on how much, again, is going to depend on what you're using, but what I would say as far as an amount, we base it on a corn recommendation. So on a corn recommendation, what we recommend as a good rule of thumb is between 4 and 5 pounds of bait per pig at the time of conditioning. So whenever I start conditioning the trap, I may not use 15 pounds of bait. But what I'm going to do by the time I work myself up into the point where I am actually ready to catch those pigs, I am counting the number of heads in the camera whenever I'm conditioning, and then I use the adequate amount of bait for that number of pigs that are coming during conditioning. We've got to have that bait leverage. We got to have enough there that, especially if you're going to catch more than one sounder in a night in your pig brig, you got to have enough bait there to give that incentive for that second sounder that shows up to go in that trap. Other things by adding enough bait into that is that bait's going to keep those pigs occupied for longer periods of time. They're not going to be trying to get out of that net. So if you only give 10 pounds of bait for 20 pigs, it's not going to be long. They're going to be trying to get out of that net. With plenty of bait in the ground, they're going to eat, they're going to stay occupied on that, but they're also going to fill up. So whenever they get full and they get content with what they've got, rather than challenging a net, getting ready to go home, they're going to lay down and sleep it off until the sun starts coming up when it's time to go home. So then we're going to start going into this last bullet point where we're going to be moving from conditioning to trapping. And what we do when we're moving it from conditioning to trapping, a lot of people have the ideas, and if it works for you, then I'm not asking you to change what's working for you, is that they'll gradually lower that net down from that 18 inches, 20 inches above ground. They'll lower it at incremental levels going to the ground over a period of time. For me, I'm going to do it a little bit differently, and actually maybe a lot differently. Is I'm going to have it either all the way up or I'm going to go all the way down. I don't do an incremental lowering, because if those pigs are already feeding in the perimeter or in the circumference of that trap comfortably enough for you to feel like you can start lowering that net, they're probably feeding in there comfortably enough to go ahead and put it on the ground. But the other thing that I'm going to do to not go down in increments is going to be more relative to the fall of the year than it is the spring of the year. And the reason for that is antlered bucks. If you're conditioning a trap with a net 18 inches above the ground and you end up having an antlered buck that starts to condition just like pigs would too, going under that net, as you gradually lower that net to the ground, that deer is going to still try to go under that net, no matter how high off the ground it is, because they've habituated to that activity or that action, and they're going to try to go under that. So I want to remove the possibility of having any interference with a deer by just going from all the way up or all the way down. Yeah, spring of the year, no antlers on the head, so it's not that big of a deal. But for me, I'm going to set a habit, and I'm going to keep that same habit all year long, so I don't have to remember, oh yeah, it's middle of August, I'm going to need to start going from all the way up to all the way down. I just do it all the time, do it all year long. So it's not something to have to train yourself to do something different. Other things to think about real quick, and we're fixing to start wrapping this up and get into some of those questions. So don't forget, if you've got questions, start plugging those things in at the top, and we'll be glad to answer them whenever we get to the end of this. But other things you need to think about in the spring of the year is natural food availabilities. We're going to have a lot of green up, a lot of groceries out there. Pig diets are 80+% vegetation. So they like their salads. So whenever we start seeing things green up, buds start popping, berries start producing, things like that, again, you need to evaluate your particular situation. If there's that much natural food availability, do we really try to force those pigs to come to a trap? Or do we just use that short period of the time of the year to back away from those animals and maintenance our equipment, review our records, think about what we did, what worked, what didn't, and get a game plan for the remainder of the year, rather than pushing a situation that may just educate pigs? So that's something you need to think about with your individual locations and stuff like that. So the introduced food resources, agriculture. I know we're down where I was at whenever I was with A&M, with Texas A&M on the coast. They've already been planting corn. It's not long after Valentine's they start putting corn in the ground. So those introduced food crops is going to be those seeds going in the ground. It's going to be food plots that you may be putting out for your deer and your turkeys and things like that. So think about some of those introduced food resources. For you, those of y'all out there that put the deer pellets out for the spring of the year for those bucks to really get kicked off real good with that antler development, those protein pellets. Man, pigs love them too. So kind of think about that. Protect those food resources, or you're going to have some happy pigs on your hands. Think about your ground nesting birds. If you know that you got turkey and quail that you want to protect on your property, probably now is when you need to find yourself out there putting your traps up and getting things ready, because we do know that pigs are an unbelievable predator of ground nesting birds. So they'll get the vast majority of the egg clutches, and research has shown us in many places that can be upwards of 80% that we'll lose in ground nesting egg clutches from pigs. So if you got some of those resources that you definitely want to protect, look for them. Make sure that you get out there and get those pigs down, and start assessing your property where you think that nesting habitat may be, and try to figure out ways that you can make sure that they're protected. Other things you need to think about with seasonality is state laws. Some places, and this holds true even in the fall of the year, Some places won't allow you to use bait for pigs that can congregate deer or can congregate turkey. You can't hunt over bait in some locations. So before you go into these hunting seasons, you have to check out, make sure you're aware of what your laws are in that state, that you're not hunting or out of compliance with state law. You, in those situations, many times you have to be a certain distance from a bait pile, even if it's available to be put out or lawful to put it out. So check out those state laws. Always know your state laws whenever it comes time for disposal of carcasses and things like that, which is what we're going to get into now. So some of the things that we're talking about too, we're wrapping things up. We're just thinking about pig brig protocols, what we recommend, what we see that works, what we know that's tried and true. Is the bait quantity. Bait quantity is not something we want to skimp on. Yeah, it's something that we have seen a direct correlation to how many pigs we catch based on the amount of bait that we put out there. So again, like we said, if you've got 20 pigs coming in a sounder or 2 sounders and you use 10 pounds of bait there, those subadult pigs, those animals that know that they're not the big dogs that can handle the fight, they won't even try to go into a trap if they know there's not enough bait incentive to go in there. Those dominant animals that are already in there over that bait resource will push those pigs back, fight those pigs off. And those smaller animals many times won't get anything, so they won't even try. So other things there, just plenty of bait to keep those pigs occupied. Keep those pigs focused on staying in that trap where you're at. And then they'll literally they'll lay down and sleep it off many times. Time of the day for conditioning. Big thing with time of day for conditioning for me, 2 different things is, one, you need to be consistent. If you're going to, whatever time of the day you choose to bait, be consistent in that time. What I do in baiting for me is I'm going to bait as close to dark as I can. And the reason for that is going back to, I want the shortest time interval from the time I bait to the time that I expect to see pigs or I expect to catch pigs. The reason for that is that I want less interference from non-target species. So if you go and you bait your pig trap at 7 o'clock in the morning and you don't expect pigs until 8 o'clock that night, you've given deer, squirrels, turkeys, crows, everything else access to your bait for 13 hours that day. So be consistent in your conditioning. Those pigs will habituate to your behaviors, your activities. One thing definitely, folks, keep in mind, and I do this myself, because sometimes I can't trust myself. But I leave the gun at the house when I'm conditioning traps. Okay, because sometimes I've been conditioning a trap and look up and pigs are 50 yards away waiting on me to drive away. And I know from past history of knowing myself that it's too tempting to go ahead and try to send some lead down range because I got pigs standing there. Whenever I'm conditioning a trap, I just leave the gun at the house and take away the possibility. But be consistent. They will habituate to you. Be patient, but then also too think about those other non-target species and just removing that or lessening that time interval that you could have conflict from those other animals that's in that area. So the same thing is going to hold true as far as whenever we're going to check the trap, is that if we bait late in the afternoon, one of the beauties of the pig brig is that we tell you can sleep all night. If you're baiting late in the afternoon and it's after dark before those pigs get there, then as long as you can get there at dark or at daylight or slightly before, then yeah, you're probably going to be pretty okay about leaving those pigs in there. With the exception, I know some of y'all have pigs in your area that are very prone to chewing. Where I'm at in trapping and all, my pigs are not prone. My pigs are try to more run through the trap than they do sit there and they fight the trap. Where I know a lot of y'all have pigs that are exactly the opposite. So you got to know your animals in the area. What I would say though is if you're baiting your trap at 4 o'clock in the evening and you've got pigs at 6 o'clock in the evening, yeah, you may go ahead and go get those pigs out. Go ahead and clear that trap that afternoon. But the other thoughts in mind is that at certain times of the year, you catch a dominant boar and you have bred females or females with little pigs at side in the area. If you catch that big dominant boar first, those sows aren't walking into that trap if they're already bred or if they've got little pigs at side. So if you catch that dominant boar, you can basically count that as what you're going to get that night. You're not going to get any more females and things like that if they're in that certain stage of reproduction. If you have a lot of open sows out there and you've got a boar in the trap, yeah, they could possibly go into that trap. Not a big deal. But if you got that big boar and you got bred females out there and it's 10 o'clock at night and you still want to catch those females, you may have to go get that boar taken care of. And that way that opens that trap up to those females and having that possibility of a second time. But make sure that, yeah, whenever we think about checking that trap, we're coming into the warmer months of the year. Unfortunately, where I'm at in Texas, we got about a 3-day winter. So it goes straight out of the summer into our 3-day winter, straight back into the summer. So whenever those temperatures start increasing like they do quickly, pigs don't respond to heat real fast, real good. They don't sweat. They don't like to be in the direct sunlight. So what we want to do is make sure that we definitely get there early, and get those pigs out of there before they find a reason to turn over on their bellies and start sunning on you before you want them to. So get there, take care of those animals and do it as early as possible. Dispatching or transport. This first thing we're going to tell you about that is know your state laws. We know your state laws and follow those state laws. Make sure that as far as dispatching is concerned, you do it quick and you do it ethical. Make sure that you do remember you got a firearm there. That if you do have other people around the trap while you're there to dispatch, that they understand the safety, they understand where they need to be standing, and how their behaviors are expected at that trap. If you're the one with the firearm, you are the boss. They don't have a say-so in the matter. It's your responsibility to keep them safe. But knowing transport laws, you got to know your state law. And if it's not an option for you, then don't take a chance, or you're gonna get one of those love notes that none of us want to whenever you get caught transporting pigs illegally. So we're gonna go out and this is just a quick slide here that tells you that we're done with the content part of it. We're gonna be asking questions, so definitely get those in really quickly. We're gonna stay here and answer them until we get through. But what we want to make sure on those last slide there is for those of y'all in the Facebook family, the Pig Brig family, y'all know about the Facebook owners group. Make sure that you stay in contact with that group, because we are going to be posting a heck of a lot of things on there coming up. The webinar series will be posted there. It's going to be a lot of things new to what you're going to see. I know Brooke is working on there and seeing it out there quite a bit on the Catch Club. Get a chance out there and brag about some things, and we're going to be bragging on y'all. Also too, you look at our YouTube channel and look at some things out there that we've got up. If you see something out there that we don't have, or I guess if you don't see something that you want to see, let us know. We can put that video together. We got the people and the ability to get that taken care of pretty much in any landscape around the world. With Pig Brig now in 35 countries around the world, we can probably put a video together in just about any landscape that you want to see. Give us a call. We're going to be the ones answering those phones. Like Anna Maria said, we've got Shannon and Margaret that's right there, that's going to be on the front line of everything. And then whenever they get through making sure that you're taken care of, then they're going to send it down to me, Tony, or Randy, maybe John. So give us a holler. Make sure that we know that you're out there and that we can help you with anything. And always give us ideas of what you want to see in upcoming programs and webinars.